I always order the same thing, black coffee, no sugar. It's not a rule, just a habit I can't shake. Every Tuesday morning I slip into the corner of that small cafe, the one on the side street with cracked tiles and a bell that jingles every time someone opens the door. I sit facing the window, watch the drizzle smear the city lights, and fold my hands around the cup until it warms my fingers enough to pretend I've touched something alive. She was there before me, of course. I didn't notice her at first, everyone blends into the morning like gray wallpaper, but then she laughed at the cashier's joke, a soft sound that made me pause mid-scroll on my phone. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands stubbornly curling against her neck. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a cafe at 8 in the morning. She looked like she'd made it belong to her. I shifted in my seat, pretending to check emails I'd never send. The way she ordered, the same thing, every week, made a small, quiet chord resonate somewhere in me. It was absurd, the way I noticed these things. She remembered the barista had gotten her name wrong last week and corrected him with a small smile. And when she did, her eyes flicked to mine for half a second, just long enough to make me feel exposed, like a letter left unfolded on a table. I wanted to say something. Anything. But I didn't. Instead, I twisted the napkin in my hands and pretended to read a headline about stock prices. My brain replayed that half-second glance over and over, like a scratched record. Then, she moved closer to the counter. I noticed the subtle tilt of her wrist, the way her fingers lingered over the rim of her coffee cup. I imagined touching her hand, the ghost of it, and my chest tightened without permission. She looked down at a folded piece of paper she had set beside her drink. I caught her eyes looking up at the window reflections, almost as if she was weighing something invisible. I thought about how long it had been since anyone's glance held the weight of curiosity instead of routine politeness. I liked that weight. I wanted it. The cashier called her name, and she smiled again, that faint, secretive smile, and turned. Our eyes met, and this time she didn't look away immediately. She didn't say anything, just tilted her head and walked past me. I pretended to be busy with my phone, but I watched her reflection in the glass fade into the street. Then, her hand brushed against mine, not enough to notice if I blinked, but enough to set a small, shivering alarm through my chest. I swallowed, leaned back, and stared at the blank screen of my phone. An hour later, I left the cafe with my coffee, colder than I wanted it. And when I unlocked my phone, there it was, a text I hadn't expected. 3 simple words from a number I didn't have saved: "See you tomorrow?" I paused, thumb hovering over the screen, and wondered if I was ready to answer that. I texted back. Something careless, sure. My thumb lingered on the send button longer than it needed to. The next morning, she was already at the cafe when I arrived. The rain had stopped, leaving everything damp and quiet. She smiled, a small, reserved thing, but it felt heavier than any greeting I'd had before. I slid into the chair across from her, noticing for the first time how her hands were slightly calloused at the knuckles, how her nails were short and clean. "I didn't expect you to come," she said, stirring her tea slowly. Her voice had that kind of warmth that makes you forget the cold outside. "I like black coffee," I muttered. It wasn't funny. She tilted her head, half smile teasing, half skeptical. "Yeah. You like the bitter stuff," she said. And then, after a pause, "I used to drink it in college. Thought it made me look smarter." I almost laughed. Did it work? She shrugged, eyes glancing toward the window, then back at me. "Not really. But it kept me awake during lectures I didn't care about." We sat there, the quiet hum of the cafe around us, and I realized how easy it was to just exist beside her. My unsent texts, the words I never had the courage to say, all hovered like dust in the air. I wanted to ask her something deeper, something that might ruin the fragile normalcy, but I couldn't. Not yet. And yet, every time her hand moved, every time her hair caught the light, I imagined scenarios that would never happen, each one a little ache. "I'm divorced," she said suddenly, almost too casually. I blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity of the revelation. She didn't ask for a response, she just let it hang there, like steam rising from her cup. I nodded, unsure if I was supposed to sympathize or keep silent. I see. The waitress dropped off a small plate of scones, and she offered me one. Our fingers brushed, just a fraction of a second, but the contact was enough to make me aware of everything I wasn't supposed to feel. "I've got a son," she said, then laughed softly as if admitting it was a confession. "College age. I hope that doesn't scare you off." I shook my head. "No. Not really." We went back to our tea in silence. I caught her gaze once, and there it was, a quiet, knowing look, the kind that made me question the boundaries of what I should want. When she stood to leave, she reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes lingered on mine, the smallest gesture loaded with weight. And in that moment, I felt it, the subtle promise that nothing about this was ordinary, but maybe that was exactly why it mattered. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me that I didn't text her that morning. Didn't even think about it, at least, that's what I told myself. The cafe smelled faintly of rain and warm bread when I walked in, and she was already there, flipping through a notebook with her pen resting lazily between her fingers. I sat down opposite her. She looked up, smiled a little too quickly, as if she knew I'd been avoiding the small ritual we'd built. I realized how much I relied on the pattern, the tiny certainties, even though part of me knew it was reckless. "You look tired," I said, because that was all I could think to say. My voice came out lower than I intended. "I slept late," she replied, not adding anything else. I watched her hands, the way her fingers drummed lightly against the ceramic mug. Too deliberate. A nervous tick? Or something she wasn't telling me? I wanted to reach across the table, to touch her hand, to see if she would let me. My elbow hovered mid-air, the tiniest hesitation, before I dropped it. A man walked past the window, and she glanced up, then down at her notebook. "Sorry," she muttered. Not to me. Just a reflex, maybe. I didn't ask. Didn't want to push. We drank our tea in silence, the sound of the spoon against the cup louder than it had any right to be. My thoughts ran ahead of me. Should I tell her I think about her? That her laugh lingers in the empty corners of my apartment? That I imagine, God, I imagine, her closer than she should be? Her pen paused mid-word. She looked at me, the light catching in her eyes just enough to make my stomach tighten. I felt like a boy again, unsure of his place in someone else's world. You're quiet today, she said, voice small, careful. Almost a question. Just thinking, I said. A weak shield. My fingers fidgeted with the napkin I'd folded over and over in my pocket. She leaned slightly forward, and I felt it, the unspoken invitation, or maybe a test. My chest hitched. We were inches apart, the table between us feeling suddenly like nothing. I wanted to lean in. I almost did. The cafe's soft chatter seemed to hush, and for one suspended second, I saw her lips, her eyes catching mine, and the world narrowed down to that single, fragile moment. Then the door jingled, and a regular I didn't recognize smiled at her. She blinked, sat back, and the spell broke. The moment vanished before I could reach it. Her gaze lingered on mine as she sipped her tea, small tremor in her fingers. And I realized how much I wanted to cross that line, how close we'd come, and how much I feared what would happen if I did. The near kiss left a quiet ache. A reminder that the draw between us was no accident, and that the consequences, whatever they were, didn't have to wait long to arrive. It was later than usual when I found her on the park bench, the street lamps casting long, uneven shadows over the wet pavement. She had her scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, the ends dangling like unfinished sentences. I approached slowly, unsure if I should sit or just pass by. You came, she said, voice almost too soft for the quiet night. Yeah, I said, fumbling with my hands. The usual words felt empty, inadequate. I wanted to say more. Everything more. We walked a few steps together first, letting the silence stretch. My mind played over the cafe, the near touch, the unfinished confessions of yesterday. And now, here, the distance felt both closer and farther than it had before. "You seem distant," she finally said, turning her head just enough to catch my gaze. Her eyes were careful but searching, like she was trying to read the corners of me I didn't want revealed. "I'm thinking," I muttered. "Not about work. Not about anything rational. Thinking about her, the way her laugh had lingered in my apartment, the way her hand had almost touched mine." She let out a small breath, more like an exhale of frustration than anything else. "I don't like feeling like I'm intruding," she admitted. Quiet, hesitant. Vulnerable. I stopped walking, just slightly, letting the air between us thicken. "You're not," I said, but my voice betrayed me. Too soft. Too shaky. I wanted to reach for her hand, wanted to hold her in a way that made all of the silences between us matter. Her eyes flicked to the sidewalk, then back to mine. "You think about me more than you say, don't you?" I almost laughed. Almost. But then the truth caught in my throat. "Every day," I whispered, more to myself than to her. She glanced down, her fingers brushing her scarf. "I shouldn't. I mean, my son, my life." Her voice trailed off, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight of things left unsaid. I moved closer, just a step, but it felt like crossing continents. "I don't care," I said. Not fully. Not bravely. But enough that it hung there in the night. She looked at me then, and I felt it, the slow, careful crumble of her wall. A softness in her eyes that made my stomach twist. She wanted to ask something, maybe, but the words didn't come. Instead, she shifted her scarf, tucked her hair behind her ear, and glanced at the distant streetlights. "What are we doing?" she murmured. Not asking. Not accusing. Just a thread of sound that carried everything we hadn't said. And there it was. The pause. The stretch of quiet where the world seemed to shrink to just the two of us. I wanted to answer, to reach, to close the space between us. But I didn't. Not yet. The question lingered in the air. I didn't know if I could answer it, or if either of us were ready for the truth. We both felt that I went to the cafe the next morning and she wasn't there. Not unusual, exactly. She had her routines, her mornings, but the seat across from me sat empty, the mug untouched. I stared at it longer than I should have, the scent of coffee lingering in the air, faint and hollow. I texted her. 3 simple words: "Are you okay?" No reply. By lunchtime, I was convinced I'd imagined the weight of her absence. Maybe she had work. Maybe something came up. But my stomach kept twisting anyway, a subtle ache that refused to leave. When she finally did show up the next day, she seemed different. Distracted. Her laugh had lost its usual lift. Her eyes flicked past me more than they met mine. I noticed the little things immediately, the way she cradled her cup, the way her fingers lingered on the notebook, how she avoided the bench near the window we always shared. "Busy week?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," she said. Not really looking at me. "Lots going on." I wanted to press, to ask what "lots" meant, but something in her tone warned me off. Instead, I nodded and sipped my coffee in silence, pretending the awkward weight in the air wasn't there. Later, I caught a glimpse of her phone, a text preview, quickly hidden when she realized I'd looked. Something about a child, or a family matter. My chest sank. I shouldn't pry. I knew that. But the thought of not knowing gnawed at me. I tried imagining why she'd pulled back, crafting scenarios in my mind that made sense and some that didn't. Did she think I was reckless? Too young? Did she have someone else? Or was she just, herself, complicated, full of parts of life I didn't yet understand? The week blurred. I kept going to the cafe, the park, the corners where we'd met, but she didn't appear. I rehearsed messages I didn't send, rehearsed ways to ask her why without sounding desperate. I even wrote her name in the margins of my notebook, as if the act would bridge the space she had left. One night, I sat at our bench under the street lamp. The city hummed softly around me. My phone glowed with unsent messages. I missed you. Can we talk? I'm here. I didn't send any of them. The seat next to me remained empty, and I felt a curious, quiet kind of pause settle in my chest. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence, like the world had left the punctuation dangling and I had to wait for her to return it. I folded my hands over my knees, stared at the ground, and listened to the hum of the street. Somewhere, she existed, just beyond the reach of everything I could control. She was at the cafe again, the same corner seat, the same black coffee steaming faintly in front of her. I hesitated at the doorway longer than I needed to, watching her stir the spoon in circles, her eyes downcast. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than she ever had in the mornings when she smiled too easily. I slid into the seat opposite her. Silence stretched, thick and hesitant. "Hey," I said finally, unsure if I should have just turned around and left. She looked up, and for the first time all week, I saw her fully, the exhaustion, the careful restraint, the tiny tremor in her fingers as she gripped her cup. "Hey," she whispered back. We didn't say anything for a while. I wanted to speak, to unload all the months of quiet longing and the near misses, but my voice felt too loud for the fragile bubble we'd created. Instead, I just watched her, noticing the way her hair fell over one shoulder, the crease near her eyes when she concentrated. I missed this," I said finally. My words felt inadequate, and I knew it. She didn't reply immediately. She just let her gaze linger on mine, and the quiet seemed to say more than any explanation could. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she admitted, voice almost a whisper. "I wasn't sure if it was okay to." Her sentence broke off. I didn't need her to finish it. I reached across the table. Not boldly. Not theatrically. Just my hand, hovering for a moment, then brushing hers. A touch that said everything and nothing all at once. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers curl slightly into mine. "I've been thinking," I said, still careful, "about what I want. What I shouldn't. What I can't control." My words stumbled over themselves. But the pause between them felt heavy with truth. She squeezed my hand. A small, quiet gesture, full of weight. "I know," she said, almost too softly. "I've been thinking too. About what I can risk. About what might break if we," and then she didn't finish. She didn't have to. I understood. The rest of the world fell away. The other tables, the clink of spoons, the half-empty cups, they all blurred into insignificance. Just her, just the warmth of our hands brushing, and the steady rhythm of a shared breath. I let myself smile. Not a grand, triumphant smile. Not a poetic one. Just a human smile, one that admitted the months of waiting, of hesitation, of fear, and still said, "Okay." She returned it with the faintest upward curve of her lips, and in that quiet exchange, I realized the truth. We had chosen each other, not with words shouted or promises carved in stone, but with the small, careful courage it took to reach across the table and stay. We stayed like that, hands touching, breathing, the space between us finally settled. Not perfect. Not forever. Just enough. Weeks passed. Not in leaps or dramatic turns, but in the quiet rhythm of mornings and routine. I still ordered black coffee at 8:47 every Tuesday, and she always arrived a few minutes earlier, her scarf wrapped the same way, hair pinned loosely, carrying the faint scent of rain and peppermint tea. The cafe never felt small anymore. Somehow, it had grown to hold us, our pauses and half-smiles, the soft silence between sips and the occasional shared laugh over something trivial. We walked to the park bench sometimes, the one where we'd nearly crossed the line one evening, where our hands had brushed under street lamps and we'd spoken volumes without saying a word. I liked to sit there first, watch the light shift across the wet pavement, knowing she'd join me soon. And when she did, her presence filled the space in the way I hadn't realized I'd been holding it open for months. We didn't announce anything, didn't declare love with grand gestures. That wasn't us. Instead, we reached across tables, leaned together over tea, shared glances that lingered just long enough, and sometimes just sat in silence, feeling seen. It was slower than I'd imagined, but steadier. Her son visited sometimes. We navigated the edges carefully, learning how to exist without rushing, without forcing anything that might fracture the quiet trust we'd built. I learned patience in a way I hadn't known I needed. I still folded napkins absent-mindedly, still caught myself staring at her hands when she reached for a cup, still imagined her smile long after she'd gone. And she noticed, always, and would do the same, small mirrored gestures that made our connection feel like a language of its own. One morning, she handed me my usual black coffee without a word, and I realized she'd memorized the way I liked it long ago. That simple act, the steam curling from the cup, her eyes catching mine over its rim, carried more weight than any confession. Later, on the park bench, she tilted her head slightly toward me, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" she asked. I nodded. "I do. You looked at me like I wasn't supposed to be here, but somehow, maybe I was." She laughed softly, and it wasn't the loud, careless laughter of a stranger. It was ours. The bench, the tea, the timing, the way life had stretched and paused around us, they had all become quiet markers of what we had earned, together. I realized, in that stillness, that love didn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes, it settled in the corners of routine, in the half-smiles and lingering glances, in the act of showing up and being seen. And when she leaned back against me slightly, hand brushing mine, I thought, this is enough. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?